$47. That's what she was worth to them. Standing in that freezing boarding house, 18-year-old Clara Whitmore heard two men haggle over her like cattle while a blizzard tried to tear the world apart outside. Her uncle wanted cash. The stranger wanted help. Nobody asked what she wanted. In 2 hours, she'd be dragged into the Wyoming mountains by a man she'd never met, to raise children who weren't hers, in a house still haunted by a dead woman's memory. This is Clara's story, from sold property to something she never imagined possible. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wind hit like fists. Clara pressed herself against the boarding house window, watching snow devour the street below. Cheyenne had seen bad winters before, but this one felt personal, like nature itself wanted to bury everything ugly about this town and start over. She almost wished it would. At least then she wouldn't have to hear her uncle's voice drifting up from the parlor, talking about her like she was furniture he needed to unload. "She eats too much," Elias Crow was saying. His voice carried that particular blend of bitterness and bourbon that Clara had learned to recognize from 3 rooms away. "And she's got no prospects. No husband's gonna want damaged goods." Damaged goods. Clara's hand went to the scar along her jaw, a souvenir from when she was 12, and her uncle decided a wood stove was the best teacher for a clumsy girl who burned his supper. The burn had healed badly, leaving a twisted line of pale skin that she'd stopped trying to hide years ago. What was the point? Everyone in Cheyenne already knew Elias Crow's niece was the unwanted orphan living on borrowed time and charity that never came. "How old is she?" another voice asked. Deeper, unfamiliar. The kind of voice that didn't waste words. 18, old enough to work, young enough she won't give you trouble. "I'm not looking for trouble. I'm looking for help." Clara shifted closer to the vent in the floor, the one that carried heat and conversation up from the room below. She knew eavesdropping was dangerous. Knowledge had a way of making things worse, but something about this conversation felt different, final. "My wife died 8 months back," the stranger continued. His words came out flat, like he'd said them so many times they'd lost their shape. "Left me with 3 children and a ranch that's falling apart. I need someone who can cook, clean, help with the young ones. Someone who won't run off first chance they get." "Clara won't run," Elias said, and Clara heard the ugly smile in his voice. Where's she gonna go? The truth of that settled in her chest like a stone. Where would she go? She had 43 cents hidden in a sock, no living family besides Elias, and exactly 0 people in this town who'd take her in without expecting something worse than housework in return. The widow Morrison had made that clear last summer when she offered Clara a position that involved considerably less cleaning and considerably more entertaining the ranch hands who passed through town. Clara had chosen hunger instead. "I can pay," the stranger said. "Not much, but fair." "How much is fair?" A pause. Clara imagined them sizing each other up, 2 men negotiating over a girl they'd never asked if she wanted to be negotiated over in the first place. $47. And a horse. The number hit Clara like a slap. $47. She'd once seen a decent milk cow sell for $60. A good saddle went for $30. Somewhere between livestock and leather goods, that's where she ranked. "Throw in that Morgan mare," Elias countered, "and you got yourself a deal." "The mare's worth twice that." "Then I guess you don't need help that bad." Another pause. Longer this time. Clara held her breath, waiting for the stranger to tell Elias to go to hell, to walk back out into the blizzard and find help somewhere else. Anywhere else. Instead, "Fine. $47 and the mare, but I'm taking her tonight." "Tonight? In this storm?" "I got children at home alone with nothing but a neighbor checking in twice a day. The longer I'm gone, the worse things get. So yes, tonight." Clara's stomach dropped. She looked at the window again, at the snow coming down so thick she couldn't see the building across the street. People died in weather like this. Froze solid 20 feet from their own front doors, 2 turned around to find their way home. "Your funeral," Elias said. She heard glasses clink, a deal sealed in whiskey. "I'll fetch her." Clara scrambled away from the vent and dove for her bed, heart hammering. She had maybe 2 minutes before Elias came upstairs. 2 minutes to decide if she was going to fight this or let it happen. But that was the thing about being Clara Whitmore. She'd stopped fighting 3 years ago, right around the time she realized fighting only made things hurt worse. The door banged open without a knock. Elias filled the frame, backlit by the hallway lamp, his face lost in shadow. Claire couldn't see his expression, but she didn't need to. She'd memorized every variation of his contempt years ago. "Get your things," he said. "You're leaving." "Where?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Does it matter?" "I'd like to know." "You'd like?" Elias laughed, short and sharp. "Since when do you get what you'd like? There's a man downstairs who needs help with his ranch. You're going with him. End of discussion." "What man? I don't know him." "You don't need to know him. You need to do what you're told for once in your miserable life." Elias stepped into the room, and Clara caught the whiskey smell rolling off him in waves. "I fed you for 3 years, Clara. Kept a roof over your head when nobody else would. You owe me." The unfairness of it burned in her throat. She'd scrubbed his floors, cooked his meals, washed his clothes, endured his moods and his fists, and his endless reminders that she was a burden he bore out of Christian charity. But pointing that out would only make things worse. "Can I at least meet him first?" "You'll meet him on the way to his ranch. Now pack. You got 5 minutes." He left the door open when he walked out. A reminder that privacy, like everything else, was something she didn't get to keep. Clara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the room that had never quite felt like hers. A narrow mattress, a crooked dresser, a mirror with a crack running through it like a scar. She owned almost nothing. 2 dresses, both faded, a coat that didn't quite keep out the cold, a pair of boots held together with prayer and stitching, a hairbrush missing half its bristles, and a small wooden box containing her mother's wedding ring, a lock of her father's hair, and a photograph so worn she could barely make out their faces anymore. That was it. 18 years of life reduced to items that fit in a single carpet bag. She packed mechanically, her hands knowing what to do even while her mind spun in circles. What kind of man bought a girl from her uncle in the middle of a blizzard? What kind of ranch was so desperate for help that tonight was the only option? And what kind of children waited at home, alone except for a neighbor's pity? Clara fastened her mother's ring on a chain around her neck, tucked the photograph into her bodice where it wouldn't get wet, and slung the carpet bag over her shoulder. In the cracked mirror, her reflection looked back, too thin, too pale, a girl who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. She looked like someone easy to sell. Downstairs, the stranger stood by the door, already dressed for the storm. He wore a heavy coat caked with snow, a hat pulled low, and a scarf wrapped around his face so only his eyes showed. They were dark, brown, or maybe black, she couldn't tell in the lamplight, and they didn't soften when they landed on her. "This is her?" he asked Elias. "That's her. Clara, this is Rhett Callahan. You'll be working his ranch up in the mountains." "Working?" Clara repeated quietly. "Not marrying?" Elias barked a laugh. "You think a man like Rhett Callahan needs to buy a wife? You're hired help, girl. Remember that." Rhett's eyes flicked to Elias, something sharp passing through them, but he didn't argue. Instead, he looked back at Clara. "You know how to cook?" "Yes, sir." "Clean, mend, basic ranch work?" "Yes, sir." "You scared of hard work?" "No, sir." "Good." He pulled a small pouch from his coat and handed it to Elias. Clara heard coins shift inside, $47 in silver and gold, the price of her future. "The mare's tied outside. She's yours." Elias took the pouch without looking at Clara. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't offer any last piece of avuncular wisdom. Just pocketed the money and walked back toward the parlor, already counting his windfall. Clara stood there, carpet bag in hand, waiting for Rhett Callahan to tell her what happened next. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Some. Not well." "You'll be in the wagon with me then. It's going to be rough. Storm's getting worse." He opened the door, and the wind screamed in, bringing snow and cold, and the smell of a world trying to kill anything stupid enough to be outside. "Stay close. If you fall behind, I might not be able to find you again." It wasn't a threat, just a fact. Clara followed him into the blizzard. The wagon was small, built for cargo more than comfort. Rhett had tied down everything that might blow away, lashing canvas over supplies Clara couldn't identify in the dark. 2 horses stood hitched to the front, their heads down against the wind, and tied behind them was the mare Elias had demanded, a beautiful Morgan with a coat the color of burnt copper, barely visible through the snow. "Get in," Rhett said, climbing up onto the bench seat. And hold on, road's gonna be bad. Clara hauled herself up beside him, clutching her carpetbag against her chest. The seat was barely wide enough for two people, and she tried to make herself smaller, aware of how close Rhett was, how solid he felt compared to the storm raging around them. He didn't look at her, just snapped the reins, and the horses lurched forward into the white chaos. The first hour was the worst thing Clara had ever experienced. The cold wasn't just cold, it was a living thing that clawed through her coat, bit through her gloves, turned her face numb and her fingers useless. The wind screamed like something dying. Snow came at them sideways, building up on the canvas cover, weighing down the wagon until the horses struggled with every step, and Rhett didn't talk. He just drove, his face set, his hands steady on the reins even when Clara couldn't see the road anymore, couldn't see anything except white darkness and the occasional ghost shape of a tree or building. "How far?" she finally shouted over the wind. 4 hours, maybe 5 in this weather." 5 hours. Clara's feet were already numb. She couldn't feel her nose. Her lungs burned with every breath of frozen air. "You're going to want to stay awake," Rhett added, not looking at her. "People fall asleep in cold like this. They don't wake up." So Clara stayed awake. She counted the seconds between her heartbeats, wiggled her toes inside her boots, even though she couldn't feel them. Thought about her parents, dead 6 years now, both taken by fever within a week of each other, and wondered if they'd be ashamed of what she'd become. A girl sold for $47 and a horse. Somewhere around the second hour, Rhett finally spoke again. "My wife's name was Elizabeth," he said, voice rough from disuse or emotion. Clara couldn't tell. "She died in childbirth. Baby didn't make it either." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. 3 kids at home, Owen's 12, Sadie's 9. Emmy just turned 5. He paused. "They lost their mother. They don't need another one. What they need is someone to keep the house running so I can keep the ranch running. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "Don't call me sir. I'm not old enough for sir." "What should I call you?" "Rhett's fine." He glanced at her for the first time since they'd left town. In the darkness, she couldn't make out much except the hard line of his jaw and the exhaustion carved into his face. "How old are you?" 18. He swore softly. "You're a baby." "I'm old enough to work." "That's what your uncle said." Something bitter entered his tone. "Man sells his own niece like she's cattle. What kind of person does that?" Clara thought about defending Elias. Habit, mostly, but couldn't find the words. What defense was there? "The kind who doesn't want her," she said instead. Rhett looked at her again, longer this time. Then he turned back to the road, or where the road should be. "Yeah, well, you'll work for your keep at my place, but you won't be property. That clear?" "Yes." "And if it doesn't work out, I'll bring you back to town. Won't just turn you out in the cold." It was more kindness than Clara had expected from a man who'd bought her like livestock. She tucked it away carefully, a small warmth against the killing cold. The third hour, the wagon hit something hidden under the snow. A rock, a frozen rut, Clara never knew, and lurched hard to the left. She flew sideways, would have tumbled right off the bench if Rhett hadn't shot out an arm and caught her, hauling her back with strength that surprised her. "Told you to hold on," he muttered, but his hand stayed on her arm for a moment longer than necessary, making sure she was steady. "Sorry. Don't apologize. Just don't fall off. I don't want to explain to my kids why I came home with a frozen corpse instead of help." It shouldn't have been funny, but something about the way he said it, completely serious, made Clara laugh. Just a small sound, barely audible over the wind, but it felt strange in her mouth. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. Rhett glanced at her, something almost like surprise crossing his face. Then he looked away again. The fourth hour, Clara started seeing things that weren't there. A house in the distance that disappeared when she blinked. A person standing beside the road who turned out to be a snow-covered fence post. The cold was playing tricks on her mind, making her wonder if this whole night was real or if she'd frozen to death in that boarding house, and this was just what dying felt like. "Almost there," Rhett said, and Clara realized she'd been swaying, her eyes drifting closed. "Stay with me. 10 more minutes. I'm fine." "You're half frozen. Here." He shrugged out of one of his blankets. He'd had 2 wrapped around him, Clara realized, and draped it over her shoulders. "Can't have you dying before you even meet the kids. They'd never forgive me." The blanket was warm from his body heat, and Clara pulled it tight, tucking her frozen hands underneath. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the house. The house appeared out of the darkness like something from a ghost story. It was bigger than Clara expected, 2 stories, built from rough-hewn logs and river stone, with a wide porch and several outbuildings barely visible through the snow. But it looked wrong. Dark. Like nobody had lived there in years instead of months. Rhett pulled the wagon up to the barn and jumped down, his movement still sure despite the hours in the cold. Stay here. I'll get the horses settled. But Clara climbed down anyway, legs shaky, feet completely numb. She wasn't going to sit useless while he worked. Rhett glanced at her, something that might have been approval crossing his face. Barn's warmer than outside. Come on. The barn was warmer, not by much, but enough that Clara's face started to hurt as feeling returned. Rhett moved through the space with practiced efficiency, unhitching the horses, leading them to stalls, checking water and feed. Clara tried to help, but her hands were too clumsy, her movements too slow. Just stand by the stove, Rhett said, nodding toward a small potbelly in the corner. Warm up. You're no good to anyone with frostbite. Clara obeyed, holding her hands near the heat, gasping as pins and needles shot through her fingers. It hurt worse than being numb, but she knew that meant the flesh was still alive, still salvageable. When Rhett finished with the horses, he grabbed her carpet bag and gestured toward the barn door. House is next. Fair warning. It's not much. And the kids... He trailed off, and Clara saw something complicated pass through his expression. The kids are still learning how to be okay again, he finally said. Don't expect them to like you right away. Don't expect them to trust you. Just do your job and give them time. I understand. Do you? He looked at her hard. Because they've had enough people disappoint them. I won't have you adding to that pile. It was the first time he'd sounded anything close to threatening, and Clara understood. Whatever else Rhett Callahan was, he was a father first. Those kids were the line he'd die defending. I won't disappoint them, Clara said quietly. Rhett studied her a moment longer, then he nodded and opened the barn door. The walk to the house was short, maybe 30 yards, but it felt longer. Clara's legs didn't want to work right, and the cold hit twice as hard after the relative warmth of the barn. Rhett matched her pace, not rushing, one hand under her elbow to keep her steady. The front door wasn't locked. Rhett pushed it open and called out, Owen, kids, I'm home. Silence answered him. Then footsteps on the stairs, fast and heavy. A boy appeared at the top, tall for 12, rail-thin, with dark hair and his father's serious eyes. He looked at Rhett, then at Clara, and his face closed up like a door slamming shut. You brought someone, Owen said. It wasn't a question. This is Clara. She's going to help around the house for a while. Rhett's voice was careful, like he was navigating a conversation they'd had before. Where are your sisters? Sadie's in the kitchen. Emmy's asleep. It's barely 8. She was tired. Something silent passed between father and son. An argument or an understanding, Clara couldn't tell. Then Owen looked at her again, and Clara saw the distrust written plainly on his face. She gonna leave too? He asked. When it gets hard? Owen. Ma didn't leave, the boy interrupted, his voice rising. She didn't want to go. But everyone else we hired did. Mrs. Patterson lasted 2 weeks. Sarah Vance didn't even make it through 1. So forgive me for asking, is she going to run the first time Emmy cries all night, or Sadie burns supper, or I track mud through the house? The silence that followed was brutal. Clara stood in the entryway, dripping melted snow onto the floor, while a 12-year-old boy stared at her like she was already gone. I'm not going anywhere, Clara said quietly. That's what they all say. Owen, that's enough. Rhett's voice had steel in it now. Show Clara to the spare room, then get to bed. It's not the spare room anymore, Owen shot back. It's Ma's room. That's where her things are. That's where she died. Clara's stomach dropped. She looked at Rhett, waiting for him to correct his son, to say there was another room, anywhere else she could sleep. But Rhett just nodded, his face carved from stone. It's the only room we have. I'll move Elizabeth's things tomorrow. Don't. Clara surprised herself with the word. Both Callahan men looked at her, and she forced herself to continue. I mean, if that's where they belong, don't move them on my account. I don't mind. Owen's expression flickered, suspicion mixing with something else, something almost like relief. "Fine," he said shortly. Then he turned and climbed back up the stairs without another word. Rhett let out a long breath. "I apologize for my son." "Don't. He's protecting his family." Clara pulled off her soaked gloves, her fingers red and swollen. "That's nothing to apologize for." Rhett looked at her strangely again, that same expression he'd worn when she laughed in the wagon, like she was something unexpected. "You're not what I thought you'd be." "What did you think I'd be?" "Honestly, I didn't think much past, I need help and she needs somewhere to go." He rubbed his face, exhaustion finally showing through. "There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. Probably cold by now, but it's there. And there should be a fire in your room. Owen's good about keeping them going." "Thank you." "Don't thank me for selling you a room in a house full of grief." He picked up her carpet bag and handed it to her. "Get some sleep. We start early here." Then he walked away, disappearing into what Clara assumed was his own room, leaving her alone in a dark house that smelled like wood smoke and old sorrow. Clara stood there for a long moment, listening to the storm hammer the walls, wondering what the hell she'd gotten herself into. Then she climbed the stairs. The room was at the end of the hall, door already ajar. Inside, a fire burned low in a small hearth, casting orange light over furniture that still held the shape of someone else's life. A bed with a quilt stitched in a pattern Clara didn't recognize. A dresser with a hairbrush still lying out. A rocking chair by the window. And everywhere, small reminders that this space belonged to a dead woman. A shawl draped over the chair, slippers beside the bed, a half-finished embroidery hoop on the bedside table. Clara touched nothing, just set her carpet bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her wet coat, still numb with more than cold. Somewhere in the house, a child coughed. The wind screamed. And Clara Whitmore, sold for $47 and a horse, buried her face in her hands and wondered if surviving was really worth it. But she didn't cry. She'd learned years ago that crying didn't fix anything. So she just sat there in a dead woman's room, in a house full of broken people, and waited for morning to tell her what came next. Morning came with the kind of gray light that made you forget the sun existed. Clara woke to voices arguing downstairs, a man's low rumble cut by a child's sharp defiance, and for one disoriented moment thought she was back in Cheyenne, listening to Elias berate the butcher over the price of pork. Then she remembered. The blizzard, the wagon, the house full of strangers who owned her labor, if not her life. She sat up, every muscle screaming. The fire had died to ash hours ago, and the room was cold enough that her breath fogged. Through the window, snow still fell, lighter now but relentless, piling up against the fence posts until they looked like grave markers. Clara's stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since yesterday noon. But the thought of walking downstairs, of facing Rhett and his children in daylight, made her want to burrow back under the quilt and pretend none of this was real. Instead, she stood, splashed freezing water from the basin onto her face, braided her hair with numb fingers, changed into her other dress, the gray one that hid stains better than the brown. Downstairs, the argument was getting louder. "Don't care what you think, you're going to school when the weather clears, and that's final. School's a waste of time. I should be helping you with the ranch. You're 12 years old, Owen. You'll help when your schoolwork's done. Ma let me skip school when we needed—" "Your ma isn't here anymore." The silence that followed was worse than the yelling. Clara stood at the bottom of the stairs, frozen, watching Rhett and Owen face off across the kitchen table like two bulls about to charge. The boy's face was red, his fists clenched. Rhett looked like he hadn't slept, dark circles under his eyes, jaw tight with exhaustion or anger or both. Then Owen noticed her. "She's awake," he said flatly. "Guess she didn't run off in the night after all." "Owen?" Rhett's voice held a warning. "What? I'm just surprised. Mrs. Patterson was gone before breakfast on day 3. Clara stepped into the kitchen, keeping her voice level. "I told you I wasn't leaving." "Yeah, well, people lie." "Owen, go check on the horses," Rhett said. It wasn't a request. The boy grabbed his coat without another word and slammed out the back door hard enough to rattle the windows. Rhett stood there a moment longer, staring at the door, then seemed to remember Clara was watching. "Coffee's on the stove," he said. "Help yourself." The kitchen was bigger than Clara expected, with a massive wood stove that probably heated half the first floor, a long table scarred from years of use, and windows that looked out over what must be beautiful country when it wasn't buried in snow. But like the rest of the house, it felt abandoned somehow. Dishes piled in the basin, flour dusted across the counter. A pot of something, stew maybe, congealed on the back of the stove. Clara poured herself coffee in a chipped mug and took a sip. It was strong enough to strip paint, and she swallowed hard, trying not to grimace. "Too strong?" Rhett asked. He was watching her with that same measuring look from last night. "It's fine." "You're a bad liar." He almost smiled. "Owen makes it. Says if it doesn't wake you up, it's not worth drinking." He's not wrong. This time Rhett did smile, just barely, and Clara saw what he must have looked like before grief carved him hollow. Probably handsome. Definitely younger than the 40-something she'd guessed last night. Mid-30s, maybe? Old enough to have buried a wife, but young enough that the loss still looked fresh. "You hungry?" he asked. "I can wait." "That's not what I asked." Clara's stomach answered for her, growling loud enough that Rhett raised an eyebrow. "Right, sit down. I'll make eggs." "I can cook. That's why I'm here, isn't it?" "You can cook starting tomorrow. Today you're still half frozen and trying to figure out if you made a terrible mistake." He pulled a skillet from the wall. "So sit. That's an order." Clara sat. She watched Rhett move through the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing this alone for too long. Cracked eggs one-handed, sliced bread without looking, found butter and jam and plates without hesitation. This wasn't a man playing at domesticity. This was survival routine, beaten into muscle memory. "How long have you been doing this by yourself?" Clara asked. "Since Elizabeth died. 8 months, 2 weeks, 3 days. He said it matter-of-factly, like he'd been counting. "Had some help at first. Neighbors brought food, checked in. Mrs. Patterson lasted the longest, almost a month. But Owen's right about one thing. Everyone leaves eventually." "Why?" Rhett flipped the eggs, not looking at her. "Because it's hard. Ranch work's hard in good times. In winter, with 3 grieving kids and a man who doesn't know how to talk about feelings, most people don't want to sign up for that. But you thought I would? I thought you didn't have a choice." He plated the eggs and set them in front of her. "Eat." The eggs were perfect. Crispy edges, runny yolks, still hot enough to steam. Clara ate without tasting, shoveling food into her mouth like someone might take it away. She'd learned that habit living with Elias. Never knew when the next meal was coming. Rhett sat across from her with his own plate, but he just pushed the eggs around, not eating. "Owen thinks I'm replacing his mother," Clara said quietly. "Owen's 12 and angry and looking for someone to blame." Rhett finally took a bite, chewing slowly. "It's not about you. It's about him hurting and not knowing what to do with it." "And the girls?" Something shifted in Rhett's expression. "Sadie's managing. She's 9, thinks she has to be the woman of the house now. Cooks, cleans, tries to take care of Emmy. She's too young for that kind of weight, but I don't know how to make her stop." "And Emmy?" Rhett set down his fork. "Emmy stopped talking 3 weeks after Elizabeth died. Hasn't said a word since." Claire's chest tightened. "At all?" "Not one. Doctor says there's nothing physically wrong with her, just grief, I guess. Losing her mother broke something inside that little girl, and I don't know how to fix it." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the wind still worrying at the windows and the tick of the stove burning. "Can I meet them?" Clara asked. "The girls?" "Sadie's probably in the cellar doing laundry." "Emmy?" Rhett hesitated. "Emmy doesn't like strangers much. Might take her time warming up to you." "That's okay. I'm patient." Rhett studied her again with that look she couldn't quite read. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I'm starting to think you might be." The cellar stairs were steep and dark, the kind that made you test each step before trusting it with your weight. Clara followed Rhett down, one hand on the rough stone wall, and emerged into a low-ceilinged space that smelled like lye soap and damp earth. A girl stood at a washboard, scrubbing clothes with fierce concentration. She was small for 9, thin like her brother, with dark hair in a braid that was coming undone, and her mother's face, if the photograph on the mantel upstairs was accurate. She looked up when they came down, and Clara saw the exact moment the girl's expression shuddered. "Sadie," Rhett said gently, "this is Clara. She's going to be helping around the house for a while." Sadie looked Clara up and down with an assessment that would have been funny coming from someone 3 times her age. You know how to do laundry? Yes. Cook? Yes. Sew? Well enough. Can you read? Clara blinked at the question. Yes. Can you? Of course I can read. Mama taught me. Sadie turned back to her washing. I'm just checking if you're stupid. Sadie! Rhett's voice went sharp. Apologize. Why? You're always saying we should know who we're dealing with. That's not... Rhett stopped, rubbed his face. Just be polite. I'm being practical. Sadie attacked the shirt she was washing with renewed vigor. The last lady couldn't read. The one before that couldn't cook anything except porridge. And Mrs. Patterson was scared of the dark, which is real useful on a ranch in winter. Despite everything, Clara felt her mouth twitch. I'm not scared of the dark. Good. Because the root cellar doesn't have windows, and someone has to get vegetables for dinner. I can do that. We'll see. Sadie finally looked at her again, and Clara saw the fear hiding under all that bravado. You planning on staying, or are you just here until something better comes along? It was the same question Owen had asked, dressed in different words. Clara understood what these children were really asking. Can we trust you not to break us again? I'm staying, Clara said. That's what they all say. I know, but I mean it. Sadie's hand stilled on the washboard. For a second, she looked like she wanted to believe, wanted it so badly it hurt. Then the walls came back up. Fine. If you're staying, you can finish this washing. I need to start bread before we run out. She wiped her hands on her apron and brushed past Clara on her way to the stairs, pausing just long enough to add, and don't use too much soap. We have to make it last. Then she was gone, leaving Clara and Rhett alone in the damp cellar. She's a lot, Rhett said. She's scared. Yeah, he sighed. They all are. Emmy, most of all. Can I meet her? She's probably in Elizabeth's sewing room, spends most of her time there, playing with scraps of fabric and buttons. Just... He hesitated. Don't expect much. And don't push. Emmy'll come around when she's ready. The sewing room was tucked under the stairs, barely bigger than a closet. But someone, Elizabeth probably, had made it cozy. A small window let in gray light. Shelves held jars of buttons, spools of thread, folded fabric in colors that seemed too bright for this grief-soaked house. And in the corner, sitting cross-legged on a braided rug, was the smallest child Clara had ever seen. Emmy Callahan was 5 years old and looked like something out of a storybook. Huge dark eyes, hair in messy curls, wearing a dress that was too big and had probably belonged to Sadie first. She had a collection of buttons spread out in front of her, arranging them by color with intense focus. She looked up when Clara appeared in the doorway. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Clara had no idea what to say. All the practice words died in her throat because this wasn't a child who needed platitudes. This was a child who'd been hurt too much already. So Clara just smiled, small, not pushy. Emmy blinked once, then went back to her buttons. Clara took it as permission and sat down on the floor a few feet away, careful not to disturb the button patterns. Those are pretty, she said quietly. I like the blue ones. Emmy said nothing, but her hands paused just for a second. I used to collect buttons when I was little, Clara continued, keeping her voice soft. Had a whole jar of them. My favorite was this green one shaped like a leaf. Probably lost it years ago. Still nothing. But Emmy picked up a green button and held it to the light, examining it. Clara stayed quiet after that, just sitting with the girl in comfortable silence while snow fell outside and the house creaked around them. After a few minutes, Emmy went back to sorting, and Clara stood carefully. I'll be around if you need anything, she said. Nice to meet you, Emmy. She turned to leave and almost ran into Rhett, who'd been standing in the hallway just out of sight. He looked at her strangely again. What? Clara asked. You didn't try to make her talk. Why would I? She'll talk when she's ready. Everyone else tried, begging, bribing, threatening. Thought if they pushed hard enough, she'd crack. That's not how people work, Clara said. You can't force someone to heal on your schedule. Rhett's expression did something complicated. No, he said slowly. I guess you can't. The rest of that first day passed in a blur of work. Clara helped Sadie with the bread, or rather, watched Sadie bully the dough into submission while providing occasional commentary. The girl was competent but joyless about it, attacking each task like an enemy to be conquered rather than something that might bring satisfaction. Mama used to sing while she baked, Sadie said at one point, punching down the risen dough with more force than necessary. Made everything seem easier somehow, but I can't remember the songs anymore, just that she sang them. Claire's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Everybody's sorry. Doesn't bring her back. Sadie shaped the dough into loaves with practiced hands. You know what's worse than people being sorry? People forgetting. Mrs. Patterson kept calling me Sarah, and that lady before her asked why we didn't just sell the ranch and move to town, like Mama was a thing we could just replace with better weather. Your mother must have been special. She was everything. Sadie's voice cracked, just a little. And now there's just this big hole where she used to be, and everyone keeps trying to fill it with people who aren't her. Clara wanted to say something comforting, something wise, but she'd lost her own parents. She knew comfort was a lie people told to make themselves feel better about the unfixable. No one's going to fill that hole, Clara said instead, and I'm not here to try. I'm just here to help keep things running so you don't have to do it all alone. Sadie looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once and went back to her bread. That afternoon, Clara discovered the house was in worse shape than it looked. The sitting room had a leak in the ceiling, probably from ice damming on the roof. The pump in the kitchen stuck halfway up, making every bucket of water a fight. The stairs creaked loud enough to wake the dead. And everywhere Clara looked, she found small signs of a family barely holding together. Mending piled in baskets that no one had time to finish, windows that needed caulking, floors that hadn't been properly scrubbed in months. She started making a mental list of what needed fixing, then realized the list was longer than she could manage, and just picked the most urgent things instead. While she worked, Owen watched her from a distance. Not helping, not interfering, just watching, like he was waiting for her to prove him right by giving up. Clara ignored him and kept scrubbing floors. Dinner was an awkward affair. Sadie had made venison stew that was passable but under-seasoned. Rhett sat at the head of the table, eating mechanically. Owen glowered at his plate. Emmy sat beside her father, moving food around without eating much. And Clara occupied the seat that must have been Elizabeth's, feeling like an intruder at a funeral. How was school? Rhett asked Owen. Didn't go. Storm's not clear enough. Tomorrow then. Maybe. Not maybe. Tomorrow. Rhett's voice went hard. We've had this conversation. Owen stabbed at his stew. Don't see why it matters. Book learning doesn't help run a ranch. Book learning helps you not get cheated when you sell cattle. Helps you read contracts and keep accounts and know when someone's trying to rob you blind. Rhett set down his spoon. Your mother wanted you educated, so you're getting educated. Ma's not here to want anything anymore. The silence that fell over the table was brutal. Sadie froze mid-bite. Emmy went very still, and Rhett looked like his son had just driven a knife between his ribs. Go to your room, Rhett said quietly. Fine. Owen shoved back from the table and stormed off, boots heavy on the stairs. Sadie's eyes were shiny with tears she refused to let fall. Emmy had her hands clenched in her lap, staring at nothing. Clara kept her mouth shut and her eyes down, knowing better than to comment on family business that wasn't hers. Rhett stood abruptly. I need to check the barn. He left without another word, and Clara heard the back door slam. For a minute, she just sat there with the two girls, listening to the wind and the clock and her own heartbeat. Then Sadie spoke, voice small and broken in a way it hadn't been all day. He's right, you know, Owen, about Mama not being here. She wiped her eyes fiercely. She's not here, and nothing we do is going to change that. So I don't know why everyone keeps pretending if we just act normal enough, it'll stop hurting. Clara looked at this 9-year-old girl trying so hard to be strong and saw herself at that age, right after her parents died, trying to hold everything together because someone had to, forgetting how to be a child because childhood felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. It won't stop hurting, Clara said honestly, but it'll hurt less eventually, not because you forget, just because you get used to carrying it. That sounds terrible. It is terrible. And I'm sorry it's true. Sadie laughed, watery and surprised. You're weird. I've been told. No, I mean, everyone else tries to make it better. Tell us it's going to be fine and Mama's in a better place and time heals all wounds and all that garbage. Sadie pushed stew around her plate. But you just said it's terrible, and somehow that's... She trailed off, searching for words. More honest? Clara suggested.
Yeah, more honest. Sadie glanced at Emmy, who was still sitting frozen, then back at Clara. You really staying, or are you going to leave when you realize how messed up we all are? Clara thought about her uncle selling her for $47, about sleeping in a dead woman's bed, about having nowhere else to go, and no one who wanted her. I'm really staying, she said.
Okay, Sadie nodded slowly. Then I guess I should tell you Emmy doesn't like carrots, and you have to cut the crusts off her bread, and she sleeps with Mama's shawl every night, or she has nightmares. It was a peace offering, a tentative sharing of information that meant Sadie was maybe, possibly, starting to trust her. Clara took it carefully. Thank you, that's good to know. Also, the stove's temperamental, hot side's on the left, and you have to jiggle the damper or it smokes. And Owen's not really mean, he's just angry all the time because he thinks if he's angry enough, he won't be sad. What about you? Clara asked gently. What are you? Sadie's face did something complicated. Tired, she said finally. I'm really, really tired. That night, after the girls went to bed and the house settled into uneasy quiet, Clara found herself in the kitchen again, unable to sleep. She stood at the window watching snow fall in the moonlight and tried not to think about how small she was in this big, terrible world. The back door opened. Rhett came in, stomping snow off his boots, and froze when he saw her. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Didn't want to yet. He moved to the stove, checking the fire, adding another log. His movements were tired, worn down by the weight of being everything to everyone. You did good today, he said without looking at her. I didn't do anything. Exactly. You didn't push, didn't try to fix what can't be fixed, didn't treat them like they were problems to solve. He finally turned to face her. That's more than most people manage. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Rhett pulled out a chair and sat heavily. I need to tell you something about Elizabeth. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Because you're sleeping in her room, using her things, and the kids are going to talk about her whether you want them to or not. So you should know. He stared at his hands. She was good, really good. Patient with the kids, kind to everyone, made this house feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. And when she got pregnant again, we were happy. Scared, but happy. Clara sat down across from him, listening. Something went wrong during the birth. Baby came too early, wasn't breathing right. Elizabeth started bleeding, wouldn't stop. Doctor couldn't get here fast enough because of a storm, different storm, but just as bad. His voice stayed flat, emotionless, like if he let feeling into it, he'd break. She died holding my hand, asked me to take care of the kids, made me promise. I'm sorry, Clara said quietly. I promised her I would, and I'm trying, but I don't know how to be what they need. Don't know how to be mother and father both. Don't know how to fix Owen's anger, or get Sadie to stop trying so hard, or make Emmy talk again. He looked up at Clara, and she saw the exhaustion, the fear, the desperate hope he was trying not to feel. I know I bought you like cattle. I know that's wrong, but I'm drowning here, and you're the only lifeline I could grab. Clara understood then what this was. Not romance, not even really friendship, just two desperate people trying to survive something bigger than both of them. I'll help, she said, however I can, for as long as you need. And when you get tired of it, when it gets too hard, then I'll tell you, and we'll figure it out. She met his eyes. I'm not going to just disappear in the night. You have my word. Rhett studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, stood, and headed for the stairs. At the doorway, he paused. Clara? Yeah? Thank you for being honest with Sadie about it always hurting. He didn't look back. Everyone kept telling me it would get easier, but it doesn't, does it? It just gets different. No, Clara said. It doesn't get easier. Rhett nodded once more and disappeared up the stairs, leaving Clara alone with the fire and the snow and the weight of promises she hoped she could keep. She sat there a while longer, thinking about damaged goods and dead wives and children who'd forgotten how to trust, thinking about how she'd gone from worthless to essential in the span of a day, and how terrifying that was. Because now people were counting on her. And Clara Whitmore had never been good enough for anyone to count on before. But as she finally climbed the stairs to Elizabeth's room, to her room now, she supposed, Clara made herself a different promise. She would try, not because she had to, not because she'd been bought, But because somewhere in this broken house full of broken people, she'd found something that looked almost like purpose. And after 18 years of being invisible, purpose felt like something worth holding on to. The first week passed like walking through deep water, slow, exhausting, every step harder than it should be. Clara learned the rhythm of the ranch. Up before dawn to get the stove going. Coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Breakfast that usually involved Sadie hovering nearby, ready to criticize if Clara did something wrong. Then the endless cycle of washing, mending, cooking, cleaning, all while trying to stay invisible enough that Owen wouldn't find new reasons to resent her. Emmy remained a ghost. She drifted through the house silently, clutching Elizabeth's shawl, watching Clara with those huge dark eyes but never speaking. Sometimes Clara would find small things left outside her door. A pretty rock, a handful of wildflowers that must have been picked before the first snow, a button from Emmy's collection. Gifts, maybe, or tests. Clara was never quite sure. Rhett worked himself half to death. Up earlier than Clara, in bed later, always fixing something or feeding something or checking on something. He was polite but distant, treating Clara like a hired hand who happened to sleep under his roof. Which was fair. That's what she was. But there were moments, brief, strange moments, when Clara would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't name, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't meant to start. 10 days in, everything went to hell. It started with Sadie burning the bread. Not just burned, turned to charcoal, smoking so badly that Clara ran into the kitchen thinking the house was on fire. Sadie stood at the stove, staring at the ruined loaves, and something about the way she held herself made Clara's stomach drop. "Sadie? You okay?" The girl didn't answer, just kept staring at the bread, her shoulders starting to shake.
"Hey!" Clara moved closer carefully. "It's just bread. We can make more." "I can't," Sadie's voice came out strangled. "I can't do this anymore. I can't cook and clean and take care of Emmy and pretend like everything's fine when nothing's fine and Mama's dead and she's never coming back and I'm trying so hard, but I can't.
The sob that tore out of her was ugly and raw, the kind of crying that had been building for months. Sadie collapsed against the counter, and Clara did the only thing she could think of. She wrapped her arms around the girl and held on while Sadie fell apart. "I miss her," Sadie gasped between sobs. "I miss her so much. And everyone keeps saying it'll get better, but it doesn't. It just hurts, and I'm so tired of hurting." "I know," Clara murmured, stroking Sadie's hair. "I know, sweetheart. I know." They stayed like that until Sadie cried herself out, until the sobs turned to hiccups and then to shaky breathing. When she finally pulled away, her face was blotchy and swollen, but something had loosened in her expression. "Sorry," she muttered. "Don't be sorry. You're allowed to fall apart sometimes. Somebody has to keep things together." "Yeah, but that somebody doesn't always have to be you." Clara grabbed a cloth and dampened it, handed it to Sadie. "You're 9 years old. You should be playing with dolls or whatever 9-year-olds do, not running a household." "I don't have dolls anymore. Gave them to Emmy." Sadie wiped her face. "And somebody has to do it. Papa's barely keeping the ranch going, Owen's mad at the world, and Emmy won't talk, so it's me. I'm all that's left." The resignation in her voice broke Clara's heart. "What if it wasn't just you?" Clara asked quietly. "What if you let me help? Really help, not just work around you?" Sadie looked at her suspiciously. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm here, and because you shouldn't have to carry all this alone. You'll just leave. Everyone leaves." "Maybe I will," Clara admitted. "Maybe something will happen and I'll have to go. But right now, today, I'm here, and I'm offering to help. You can say no, but you can also say yes." Sadie studied her for a long moment, chewing her lip. Then, so quietly Clara almost missed it. "Yes." It was a small word, but it felt like a door opening. That afternoon, while Sadie actually napped, like the child she was, Clara found a small leather-bound book tucked into the kitchen cupboard. Elizabeth's recipe book, she realized, flipping through pages covered in neat handwriting. Instructions for bread, stew, pie crust. Notes in the margins. Owen hates raisins, and Sadie likes extra cinnamon, and Emmy won't eat carrots unless they're hidden in something else. At the back of the book, Clara found something that made her breath catch. A list titled, "Things to Remember When Everything Feels Like Too Much." Underneath, In Elizabeth's careful hand, the children need love more than perfection. Burned bread won't kill them. Being too tired to play will. Rhett works hard because he's scared of failing us. Tell him he's doing well. He won't believe it, but say it anyway. On bad days, take them to the meadow. Let them run. Let them be loud. Let them remember that joy still exists. You are enough. Even on days when you don't feel like it, you are enough. Clara read it 3 times, this message from a dead woman to herself, and felt something crack open in her chest. Elizabeth Callahan had been a real person, not a saint, just someone doing her best and scared she wasn't doing it well enough, just like Clara. She copied the list carefully onto a separate piece of paper and tucked it in her pocket. Then she kept cooking, using Elizabeth's recipes, following her notes, trying to honor the woman whose life she'd stumbled into. When Rhett came in for dinner that night, he stopped dead in the doorway. "What's that smell?" "Chicken and dumplings," Clara said. Sadie helped. He looked at the table, actually set properly for the first time since Clara arrived. Then at Sadie, who was carefully folding napkins, then back at Clara. "Elizabeth used to make chicken and dumplings. I found her recipe book. Hope that's okay." Something complicated crossed Rhett's face. For a second, Clara thought he was angry. Then she realized he was fighting tears. "Yeah," he said roughly. "That's okay." Dinner was quieter than usual, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the tense silence of people avoiding each other. Something softer. Owen still glowered at his plate, but he ate 3 helpings. Emmy actually tried the carrots, hidden in dumplings the way Elizabeth's note suggested. And Sadie looked less like she was carrying the weight of the world. After the kids went to bed, Rhett helped Clara clean up, something he'd never done before. They worked in companionable silence, washing and drying dishes, until Rhett finally spoke. "Sadie seems different tonight." "She had a hard day. Needed to let it out." "She cried?" He stopped mid-wipe, looking alarmed. "What happened?" "Nothing happened. She just carried too much for too long, and it caught up with her." Clara scrubbed at a stubborn pot. "She's been trying to be you and Elizabeth both. That's too much for a grown person, let alone a 9-year-old. Rhett was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't know she felt that way." "She's good at hiding it." "Yeah, she is." He set down the dish, leaned against the counter. "I'm failing them, aren't I? All 3 of them." "You're not failing them. You're drowning, and you're trying to keep their heads above water at the same time. That's different." "Doesn't feel different." Clara turned to look at him, really look at him. Saw the exhaustion carved into every line of his face, the guilt weighing down his shoulders, the fear that he was destroying his children by not being enough. "Elizabeth left you a note," Clara said quietly. "In her recipe book. Said you work hard because you're scared of failing them. Said to tell you you're doing well, even though you won't believe it." Rhett's jaw worked. "I don't believe it." "She said you wouldn't, but I'm supposed to say it anyway, so here it is. You're doing well. Your kids are fed and clothed and loved, and they're going to be okay. Maybe not today, maybe not for a while, but eventually." "You can't know that." "No," Clara admitted, "but I can choose to believe it, and so can you." Rhett looked at her like she'd said something profound instead of just obvious. Then he nodded slowly and went back to drying dishes. They didn't talk about it again that night, but something had shifted between them. Some invisible line had been crossed, from employer and employee to something that felt almost like partnership. Clara tried not to think about what that meant. 2 weeks after Clara arrived, Owen got hurt. She heard the commotion from the kitchen, shouting, running footsteps, Rhett's voice sharp with panic. Clara dropped the laundry she was folding and ran outside. Owen lay in the snow near the barn, his leg bent wrong, his face white with pain. Rhett knelt beside him, and even from 20 feet away, Clara could see the fear in every line of his body. "What happened?" she called, running over. "She t'est popad. Horse spooked, threw him into the fence." Rhett's hands hovered over Owen like he was afraid to touch him. "His leg, I think it's broken." Owen was trying not to cry, biting his lip hard enough to draw blood. "I'm fine," he gasped. "Just help me up." "You're not fine. You can't walk on that. I said help me up." "Owen, stop." Clara knelt beside them both. "Owen, look at me." The boy's eyes were glassy with pain and tears he refused to shed.
"It's okay to be hurt," Clara said quietly. "You don't have to be tough right now." "I'm not weak. Being hurt doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." She looked at Rhett. "We need to get him inside. Set the leg before it swells too much." "I don't know how to set a bone," Rhett said, and Clara heard the panic underneath. "I do. My uncle broke his arm once, and the doctor showed me." She stood. "Rhett, carry him inside carefully, and someone get Sadie. I need hot water and clean cloth."
For a second, she thought Rhett might argue. Then he nodded and scooped Owen up as gently as possible. The boy couldn't hold back a scream, and the sound of it made Clara's stomach turn. Inside, they laid Owen on the kitchen table. Sadie appeared, white-faced, with Emmy clinging to her skirt. "Is he dying?" Sadie whispered. "No," Clara said firmly, "but I need your help. Can you be brave?" Sadie nodded, swallowing hard. "Good. Get me hot water, clean towels, and anything we can use for splints. Flat pieces of wood, maybe. Go." Sadie ran. Clara turned to Owen, who was shaking now, shock setting in. "This is going to hurt," she told him honestly. "I'm sorry, but if we don't set it right, it'll heal wrong." "Just do it," Owen gritted out. Rhett stood at his son's head, holding his shoulders. "I'm here," he said roughly. "I've got you." Clara had never set a bone before. She'd watched the doctor do it once, years ago, but watching and doing were very different things. Her hands trembled as she felt along Owen's leg, trying to find where the break was, trying to remember everything she'd seen. The bone had snapped clean through, just above the ankle. Not the worst break, but bad enough. "On 3, Clara said. 1? She pulled on 2. Owen screamed, a horrible sound that would haunt her later, but the bone slid back into place with a grinding sensation that made her want to vomit. Rhett held Owen down as the boy thrashed, and Clara worked as fast as she could, splinting the leg with the wood Sadie brought, wrapping it tight. When it was done, Owen had passed out. Whether from pain or shock, Clara wasn't sure. His face was gray, his breathing shallow. "Is he okay?" Rhett asked hoarsely. "I think so." The bone's set. Now we just have to hope it heals clean. Clara's hands were shaking badly now, adrenaline draining away. "He needs to stay off it completely for at least 6 weeks. No arguments." "He's going to hate that." "Yeah, well, he'll live to hate it, which is what matters." They carried Owen up to his room and settled him in bed. Sadie brought cool water for his forehead. Emmy crept in and left her favorite button on his nightstand, a blue one, shiny as a piece of sky. That night, Clara sat with Owen while he slept fitfully, jerking awake every time the pain spiked. She dampened cloths for his fever, adjusted his splint when he shifted wrong, and told him stories about nothing just to give him something to focus on besides hurting. Around midnight, Red appeared in the doorway. "You should sleep," he said quietly. "So should you." "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see him falling." Rhett scrubbed his face. "I should have checked the fence better. Should have known the horse was skittish. Should have what? Been able to predict the future?" Clara interrupted. "Accidents happen, Rhett. That's why they're called accidents." "He's 12 years old. He shouldn't be working that hard in the first place." "No, he shouldn't, but he is. Because you need the help, and he wants to be useful." She looked at Owen's sleeping face, still pinched with pain, even unconscious. "He's a good kid. Angry and scared and stubborn, but good." "Gets the stubborn from me," Rhett said. "The angry, I think that's all his own." "The angry's just hurt wearing a different face." Rhett moved into the room, took the chair on the other side of Owen's bed. For a while they sat in silence, 2 people keeping vigil over a broken boy. "Thank you," Rhett said eventually. "For knowing what to do. I froze up completely." "You didn't freeze. You were scared. There's a difference." "Didn't feel like a difference." Clara understood that. Fear and paralysis looked the same from the inside. "When my mother died," she said quietly, "my father just stopped. Stopped talking, stopped eating, stopped caring about anything. I was 12 and I didn't know what to do. So I just kept things going. Made meals he didn't eat, cleaned a house he didn't notice, talked to him even though he never answered. And when he died 6 months later, same fever that took my mother, I felt relieved, because at least I didn't have to watch him fade anymore." Rhett looked at her. That's a hard thing for a 12-year-old to carry. Yeah, it was. Clara adjusted Owen's blanket. But I learned something from it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just keep going when everything in you wants to stop. And that's what you're doing. That's what your kids are doing. You're all just keeping going. Is that enough? Some days it has to be. They sat together until Owen's breathing evened out and his face relaxed into real sleep. Then Rhett stood, stretched, and looked at Clara with something that might have been respect. You're tougher than you look, he said. I've had practice. He nodded slowly. Get some rest. I'll stay with him for a while. Clara left him there with his son and stumbled to her room, exhausted down to her bones. She fell asleep still wearing her dress, too tired to change, and dreamed about broken things that wouldn't heal right. Owen's injury changed the household dynamic in ways Clara hadn't expected. With the boy confined to bed, Sadie became less burdened, one less person to worry about feeding and managing. She started smiling more, even laughed once when Clara told a story about Elias trying to cook and nearly burning down the boarding house. Emmy began leaving her gifts directly in Clara's hands instead of outside her door. A blue button, a smooth pebble, a drawing of the ranch house with stick figures that Clara assumed were the family. She never said anything, but her huge eyes would watch Clara's face, waiting for a reaction. Clara always said thank you, always treasured whatever Emmy gave her. And slowly, very slowly, the little girl started staying in the same room as Clara for longer periods. 5 minutes. 10. Eventually an hour, sitting quietly while Clara worked, playing with her buttons or looking at picture books. And Rhett started talking to her, not just about work or the kids. Real conversations. About the ranch, about Wyoming, about the life he'd built with Elizabeth, and how strange it felt living in it without her. We met when I was 19, he told Clara one evening while they sat at the kitchen table going over accounts. She was 16 teaching at the little schoolhouse in town, smartest person I ever met, could have done anything, gone anywhere. But she chose this. He gestured at the ranch around them. Chose me. Never understood why. Maybe she loved you, Clara said simply. I wasn't easy to love. Had a temper back then, drank too much, got in fights. Rhett shook his head. Elizabeth, she saw something in me I didn't see in myself, and she waited for me to grow into it. Sounds like she was patient. Too patient. Should have found someone who already had his life together. He looked at the numbers in front of him without really seeing them. Sometimes I wonder if I wasted her life, if she'd be happier with someone else. Clara thought about that, about loving someone and choosing them anyway, even knowing they were flawed and difficult and sometimes not enough. She chose you, Clara said finally. Every day she chose you. That means she thought you were worth it, and maybe you should believe her. Rhett's eyes met hers, and Clara saw the grief there, the guilt, the desperate need to be told he hadn't failed the woman he loved. It's hard to believe it when she's not here to remind me. Then I'll remind you. You're worth it. You're doing your best, and Elizabeth knew that, which is why she trusted you with her children. Something shifted in Rhett's expression, softened. For a moment, Clara thought he might reach across the table, might touch her hand or her face, or do something that would change everything between them. But then Owen called from upstairs, needing water or help adjusting or just company, and the moment passed. Rhett stood. I should check on him. Yeah. He paused at the doorway. Clara? Yeah? I'm glad you're here, just in case I haven't said that. Then he was gone, and Clara sat alone at the kitchen table, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. She told herself it didn't mean anything, told herself Rhett was just lonely and grateful, and she was convenient. Told herself not to read anything into the way he'd started looking at her, like she was someone worth looking at. But late at night, lying in Elizabeth's bed in Elizabeth's room, Clara couldn't help wondering what it would be like if Rhett looked at her the way he must have looked at his wife, with love instead of gratitude, with choice instead of necessity. Then she felt guilty for even thinking it and buried her face in the pillow, hating herself a little. 3 weeks after Owen's accident, the first real thaw came. The temperature climbed above freezing for the first time in months. Snow started melting in earnest, turning the ranch into a muddy mess but filling the air with the promise of spring, and Rhett announced they were going to the meadow. The meadow? Clara asked, confused. Place about a mile from here. Elizabeth used to take the kids when cabin fever got bad. He looked at Owen, still hobbling on crutches but improving. Thought we could all use some air, some space. The kids agreed immediately. Even Owen looked excited, which was the first real emotion besides anger Clara had seen from him in weeks. They packed a lunch, Clara's attempt at fried chicken and Sadie's biscuits, both passable, and headed out on foot. Owen rode the Morgan mare, his broken leg and its splint propped awkwardly. Emmy walked between Clara and Rhett, holding both their hands, and Sadie ran ahead, suddenly just a 9-year-old girl instead of a tiny adult. The meadow was beautiful. A wide expanse of land surrounded by mountains, still mostly snow-covered but showing patches of brown grass and early wildflowers. The sun was bright, the sky impossibly blue, and for the first time since Clara arrived, the world didn't look hostile. Ma loved it here, Owen said quietly, looking around from his seat on the mare. Said it was the prettiest place in Wyoming. She was right, Clara said. They spread out blankets and ate lunch in the sunshine. The kids chased each other, even Owen hobbling after his sisters, laughing when they got too far ahead. And Clara sat beside Rhett, watching this broken family remember how to be happy. Thank you, Rhett said. For what? This, them. He nodded toward the kids. I haven't heard them laugh like that since Elizabeth died. Maybe they just needed permission to be happy again. Maybe. Or maybe they just needed you. Clara's breath caught. She looked at Rhett and found him already looking at her, his expression open in a way she'd never seen before. I'm not Elizabeth, she said quietly. No, you're not. He paused. But you're you, and that's starting to matter. Before Clara could figure out what to say to that, Emmy ran over and grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a patch of early wildflowers. Clara let herself be dragged away, but she felt Rhett's eyes on her back, warm as the sun. That night, Owen asked Clara to read to him. It was the first time he'd asked her for anything, and Clara tried not to make a big deal out of it. Just grabbed a book from the shelf, some adventure story about cowboys and outlaws, and sat in the chair beside his bed. She was 3 chapters in when Owen interrupted. Why'd you stay? Clara looked up. What? Why'd you stay? You could have left by now. Papa wouldn't chase you down. You could go back to town, find something better than this. Owen's face was serious, all the usual anger temporarily set aside. So why are you still here? Clara thought about lying, making it sound noble or selfless or anything other than the truth. But Owen deserved honesty. Because I have nowhere better to go, she said simply. And because you all need help. And because, I don't know. I like it here, I guess. Even when it's hard. You like being around a bunch of sad people? I like being useful. And I like your sisters. And your dad. She paused. And I'm starting to like you, even though you've been awful to me. Owen almost smiled. I haven't been that bad. You called me an interloper. That's a good word, though. It's a mean word. Yeah. Owen's face got serious again. I'm sorry for being mean. You didn't deserve that. It was the last thing Clara expected. Thank you. He struggled with the words. I didn't want to like you, because if I liked you, you might leave, and I'm tired of people leaving. Clara's throat tightened. I'm not planning on leaving. That's what they all say. I know, but I mean it. Owen studied her face like he was trying to decide if she was lying. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, I believe you. It was the first time any of the Callahan children had said that to her. Clara finished the chapter with a lump in her throat, and when she stood to leave, Owen spoke again. Clara? Yeah? Thanks for fixing my leg, for staying with me when it hurt, for everything. You're welcome. She was almost to the door when he said, quiet as a prayer, Ma would have liked you. Clara stopped, turned back, saw Owen looking at her with Elizabeth's eyes, offering the highest compliment he knew how to give. I would have liked her too, Clara said softly. Then she left before the tears could fall. Downstairs, Rhett was banking the fire for the night. He looked up when Clara came in, saw her face, and frowned. You okay? Yeah, just... She wiped her eyes quickly. Owen talked to me, really talked. Said his mother would have liked me. Understanding crossed Rhett's face. That's big. Coming from him. I know. They stood in the firelight, the house quiet around them, and Clara felt the weight of the past month settle on her shoulders. The work, the worry, the slow, careful building of something that looked almost like belonging. I need to tell you something, Rhett said abruptly. Okay. When I brought you here, I thought I needed help with the house. Someone to cook and clean and keep things running. He looked at her steadily. But you've done more than that. You've brought life back into this place, made my kids smile again, made me remember what it feels like to not be drowning. Clara's heart was beating too fast. Rhett, let me finish, please. He took a breath. I know how this started. I know what I paid your uncle, and I know you didn't have a choice. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being about me needing help. And I need to know. He paused. If you're still here because you have nowhere else to go, or if you're staying because you want to. The question hung between them, huge and terrifying. Clara thought about lying, about keeping it simple and safe and not risking anything. But she'd spent 18 years lying to survive, and she was tired of it. I'm staying because I want to, she said quietly. Because your kids need me, and you need me, and she swallowed hard. I need you too, all of you. This family, this place. I didn't think I'd ever have this. Have what? A home. The word seemed to hit Rhett like a physical thing. He crossed the space between them in 2 steps, and for a wild second Clara thought he might kiss her. Instead, he took her hand, just held it, his calloused palm warm against hers. You have a home here, he said roughly, for as long as you want it. Not because I bought you, not because you're useful, but because you belong here. Clara's eyes burned. Thank you. They stood like that for a long moment, holding hands in the firelight, neither of them quite brave enough to name what was growing between them. Then Rhett let go, stepped back, and the moment broke. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to be busy. Clara nodded and headed for the stairs, but at the doorway, she turned back. Rhett? Yeah? You belong here too, in case nobody's told you that lately. His smile was small, but real. Good night, Clara. Good night. Upstairs, lying in the dark, Clara touched the place on her hand where Rhett had held her and let herself imagine a future where she wasn't just the hired help, where she was chosen, where she stayed not because she had to, but because someone wanted her to. It was a dangerous thing to hope for. But Clara was discovering that sometimes the most dangerous things were also the most worth having. And maybe, just maybe, she was brave enough to try. Spring came slow and stubborn, like it wasn't sure Wyoming deserved it. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass and mud and all the repairs that had been put off through the winter. Fences needed mending. The barn roof had a leak. The chicken coop looked like one strong wind would flatten it. Rhett walked the property each morning, making lists in his head that got longer every day, and Clara watched the weight of it settle on his shoulders like stones. But something had shifted after that night by the fire, something neither of them talked about, but both of them felt. Rhett started finding excuses to be in the kitchen when Clara was cooking, would lean against the counter, supposedly checking the accounts, but really just watching her work. And Clara caught herself putting on her better dress more often, braiding her hair more carefully, caring about things she'd stopped caring about years ago. It was stupid, dangerous, a complication neither of them needed, but it kept happening anyway. 2 months after Clara arrived, Emmy spoke. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Clara was mending one of Owen's shirts. The boy went through clothes like he was trying to destroy them, when Emmy appeared in the doorway holding her button collection. She stood there for a long moment, just watching, the way she always did. Then so quietly, Clara almost missed it. Can you fix this? Clara's hands froze mid-stitch. Emmy held up a small cloth bag, torn along one seam, buttons threatening to spill out. Can you fix it? Emmy repeated, louder this time, her voice rusty from disuse. Clara set down the shirt very carefully, trying not to make a big deal out of this, even though her heart was hammering. Yes, sweetheart, I can fix it. Emmy crossed the room and handed over the bag. Her hands were shaking slightly, and Clara realized how much courage this must have taken. 6 months of silence, and she'd broken it over buttons. Thank you for asking, Clara said gently. This is a pretty bag. Did your mama make it? Emmy nodded. Then, after a pause, she said buttons were magic, That every button had a story. Clara's throat tightened. That's a nice way to think about it. This one's from her wedding dress. Emmy pointed to a pearl button. And this one's from Papa's first good shirt, and this blue one's from the blanket she wrapped Owen in when he was a baby. Each button was a memory, a piece of Elizabeth carefully preserved by a 5-year-old who was terrified of forgetting. Your mama was smart, Clara said, keeping all these stories safe. Are you going to stay? Emmy asked suddenly. Or are you going to go away like Mama did? There it was. The question all 3 children had been asking in different ways, the fear that drove everything. Clara pulled Emmy close, and the little girl came willingly, burying her face in Clara's shoulder. I'm going to stay, Clara said firmly. I promise. Mama didn't mean to go, but she went anyway. I know, baby, but I'm not sick, and I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to leave, okay? Emmy was quiet for a long moment. Then, okay. When Rhett came in for lunch and found Emmy chattering away about her buttons while Clara sewed, he stopped in the doorway looking like he'd been hit by lightning. She's talking, he said unnecessarily. Has been all morning, Clara said, trying to sound casual even though she wanted to cry from relief. Rhett crossed to Emmy and knelt down, eye level with his daughter. Hey, little bird, I missed your voice. Emmy threw her arms around his neck. I missed Mama. I know, I miss her too. But Clara's here now, and she promised to stay. Rhett's eyes met Clara's over Emmy's head, and the look in them made Clara's stomach flip. Yeah, he said quietly. She did. That evening, after the kids were in bed, Rhett found Clara on the porch. She was sitting on the steps, watching the sun set over the mountains, and didn't hear him approach until he sat down beside her. Thank you, he said. I didn't do anything. Emmy just decided it was time. You gave her a reason to decide. That's something. He was quiet for a moment. When Elizabeth died, Emmy just shut down. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, wouldn't talk. I thought I'd lost both of them. And then slowly she started doing things again. Everything except talking. I was starting to think maybe she never would. Kids are tougher than we think. So are you. Clara glanced at him. I'm not tough. I'm just stubborn. There a difference? Tough is brave. Stubborn is just too stupid to quit. Rhett laughed, a real laugh that changed his whole face. Then I guess we're both stupid. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn pink and orange and purple. Clara was acutely aware of how close Rhett was sitting, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him, close enough that if she moved her hand just slightly, it would touch his. She didn't move her hand. Clara, Rhett said, his voice different now, careful. Can I ask you something? Sure. If things were different, if I'd met you some other way, not bought you from your uncle like cattle, would you still be here? The question caught her off guard. I don't know, maybe. Depends on the circumstances. Say I'd met you in town, asked you to dinner, courted you proper. He was looking straight ahead, not at her. Would you have said yes? Clara's heart was doing something complicated. Are you asking hypothetically, or are you asking? I don't know yet. Honesty. She could work with honesty. If you'd met me in town and asked me to dinner, I would have thought you were making fun of me, Clara said quietly. Girls like me don't get courted by men like you. We get used and discarded. So I probably would have said no out of self-preservation. Girls like you? Poor girls. Orphaned girls. Girls with scars and no prospects and uncles who sell them for $47. Rhett finally looked at her. That scar on your jaw. How'd you get it? Clara touched it automatically. Burned myself on a stove when I was 12. Uncle Elias said I was clumsy. Maybe I was. Or maybe I just learned to duck too slow when he was in a mood. Rhett's jaw tightened. He hit you. Sometimes. When I deserved it. Nobody deserves that. Clara shrugged. Doesn't matter now. I'm here. He's there. And I don't have to see him again if I don't want to. If he ever shows up here, I'll kill him. He said it so matter-of-factly that Clara believed him, and something about that, about someone being willing to defend her even hypothetically, made her chest feel tight. You're a good man, Rhett Callahan, she said softly. I'm a man who bought a girl from her uncle. That's not good. You're a desperate man who needed help and took the only option available. There's a difference. Is there? Yeah. A bad man would have treated me like property. You've treated me like a person. That matters. Rhett looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached over and took her hand the way he had that night by the fire. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, rough and warm. I'm glad you're here, he said. However it happened. I'm glad. Clara squeezed his hand. Me too. They sat like that until the stars came out, holding hands on the porch steps like teenagers, and neither of them mentioned that this was probably a terrible idea. The next week brought the kind of disaster that reminded Clara the universe didn't care about anyone's happiness. Emmy got sick. It started small, cough, a slight fever, nothing alarming. But by the second day the fever had spiked and the cough had gotten worse, and Emmy was burning up despite every cool cloth Clara pressed to her forehead. Rhett nearly lost his mind. Clara found him in Emmy's room at 2 a.m, pacing like a caged animal while his daughter struggled to breathe. This is how it started with Elizabeth, he said, his voice raw with panic. The fever, the coughing, and then she couldn't fight it. What if Emmy can't fight it? What if I lose her too? You're not going to lose her. Clara checked Emmy's temperature again. Still too high, but not dangerously so. It's just a fever, Rhett. Kids get them all the time. Elizabeth was strong, and I lost her anyway. This isn't the same thing. Emmy's younger, and she doesn't have complications from childbirth. We just need to keep the fever down and keep her breathing. Clara met his eyes. But I need you to be calm, because if Emmy wakes up and sees you panicking, it's going to scare her, and scared kids don't heal as well. Rhett nodded, but his hands were shaking. Go get some air, Clara said gently. Walk it off. I'll stay with her. I should be here. You should be breathing. Go. I've got her. He went, reluctantly, and Clara settled in for a long night. Emmy drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid enough to ask for water, sometimes so feverish she didn't know where she was. Clara sponged her down every hour, forced fluids when she could, and talked to her constantly even when Emmy couldn't respond. She told her stories about nothing, about Clara's mother, who could bake bread that tasted like heaven, about Clara's father, who could fix anything with his hands, about the time Clara tried to raise a baby bird and it ended up preferring the barn cat to her. Somewhere around dawn, Emmy's fever finally broke. She opened her eyes, clear for the first time in days, and looked at Clara with recognition. You stayed, she whispered. Of course I stayed. Mama Clara. Emmy's small hand found Clara's. Don't go. Clara's vision blurred. I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I promise. Emmy smiled, weak but real, and fell into actual sleep instead of fever dreams. Clara sat there holding her hand, tears running down her face, and didn't even hear Rhett come back until he spoke. The fever broke? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Rhett crossed the room and knelt beside Clara's chair. His eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion and fear, but when he looked at his daughter sleeping peacefully, something in him settled. Thank you, he said hoarsely, for not giving up on her, for staying even when I was useless. You weren't useless. You were scared. That's human. I thought I was going to lose her, kept seeing Elizabeth dying all over again, and I couldn't breathe. Clara understood. She'd felt the same thing when her father started fading after her mother died. That horrible, helpless certainty that the world was going to take away everyone you loved, and there was nothing you could do to stop it. She's going to be okay, Clara said. She's strong, like her mother. Rhett reached up and brushed tears off Clara's cheek, his touch gentle. You're strong too, stronger than you think. Clara leaned into his hand without thinking, and for a moment they stayed like that, him kneeling beside her chair, her exhausted and crying, both of them too tired to pretend anymore. Then Sadie appeared in the doorway, took in the scene, and said matter-of-factly, If you two are going to get married, you should probably do it before the whole county starts gossiping. Rhett jerked back like he'd been burned. Sadie, what? I'm 9, not stupid. She looked between them. You hold hands. You look at each other all sappy. And Owen said he heard you talking on the porch about courting. She crossed her arms. So are you going to get married or not? Because if you are, I want to help plan it. Clara's face was on fire. Sadie, we haven't. You should, though. Get married, I mean. Sadie's expression softened. Mama would want Papa to be happy again, and you make him happy. Plus, Emmy called you Mama Clara, and Owen stopped glaring at you, and I like having you here. So, yeah, you should get married." Then she turned and walked out, leaving two stunned adults behind. "I'm sorry," Rhett said immediately. "She shouldn't have. I'll talk to her about boundaries." "Is she right?" Clara interrupted. "About what?" "About us. Looking at each other. Sappy." Rhett's face did something between embarrassment and hope. "I don't know. Am I? Looking at you sappy?" "Sometimes." "Are you looking at me sappy?" Clara bit her lip. "Maybe. Sometimes." They stared at each other across Emmy's bed, both of them exhausted and emotionally wrung out and probably not thinking clearly. "This is a bad idea," Rhett said. "Terrible idea," Clara agreed. "You've only been here 2 months, and you're still grieving your wife. And the kids are just starting to adjust. And we started this whole thing with you buying me like livestock, so we shouldn't. Definitely shouldn't." Neither of them moved. Then Rhett said, "But I can't stop thinking about you." Clara's breath caught. "I can't stop thinking about you either." "This is going to be complicated. Everything's complicated. People will talk." "Let them." Rhett stood slowly, walked around the bed, and stopped in front of Clara's chair. He looked down at her with an expression that made her stomach flip. "If we do this," he said quietly, "I want to do it right. Not because I need help with the ranch, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because I choose you and you choose me." Clara stood, putting them eye to eye. "I choose you. I haven't even courted you proper. I don't need proper. I just need honest. Then honestly, I'm falling in love with you. Have been for weeks, and it terrifies me because I don't know how to love someone without losing them." Clara reached up and cupped his face, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. "I'm terrified too, but I'm tired of being afraid of good things." Rhett leaned down and kissed her. Soft at first, tentative, like he was asking permission. Clara kissed him back, and it stopped being tentative. His hands came up to her waist, pulling her closer, and Clara forgot how to breathe. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rhett rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Clara's heart stopped. "What?" "Marry me. Not because it's practical. Not because the kids need a mother or you need security, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life proving you didn't make a mistake by staying." "Rhett, we've only known each other 2 months. I know, it's too fast. It's crazy. But I've spent 8 months feeling dead inside, and you made me remember what it's like to be alive. So yes, it's fast, but it's also right. I can feel it." He pulled back enough to look at her. "If you need time, I understand. But I already know what I want. And what I want is you." Clara's mind was spinning. 2 months ago, she'd been sold for $47. Now a good man was asking her to marry him for love, not convenience. "The kids already love you. Emmy calls you Mama Clara. Owen trusts you. Sadie just gave us permission. People will say you're replacing Elizabeth. People can go to hell. I'm not replacing anyone. I'm choosing to live again instead of just surviving." His hands tightened on her waist. "But only if you want this too. Only if you choose me back." Clara thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. They barely knew each other. She was 18 and he was in his 30s. The whole thing had started with him buying her. People would absolutely talk. But she thought about the past 2 months too. About Sadie crying in her arms. About Owen trusting her with his pain. About Emmy breaking her silence. About Rhett looking at her like she was someone worth looking at. About finding a home in the last place she expected. "Yes," she said. Rhett's face transformed. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Because I love you too, even though I probably shouldn't, and I want to be part of this family for real." He kissed her again, harder this time, and Clara felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like finally being chosen. When they broke apart, Sadie was standing in the doorway again, grinning like a cat. "I knew it," she said smugly. "Owen owes me his dessert for a week." "You bet on us?" Clara asked, half laughing. "Obviously. Owen said you'd take at least 6 months. I said 3. Looks like I win." She bounced on her toes. "So when's the wedding? Can I have a new dress? Are we inviting the whole county? Will there be dancing?" Rhett looked at Clara, and they both started laughing. The kind of exhausted, slightly hysterical laughter that came from too many emotions at once.
"We'll figure it out," Rhett said. "But first, let's let your sister rest. And maybe we should tell Owen before he hears it from you." Sadie was already running down the hall yelling, "Owen! Owen, wake up! Clara and Papa are getting married!" Clara buried her face in Rhett's chest, still laughing. "Well, so much for breaking it to him gently." "Nothing about this family is gentle," Rhett said, but he was smiling. "Think you can handle that?"
I handled Emmy's fever and Owen's broken leg and Sadie's emotional breakdown. I think I can handle anything you throw at me. Even marriage to a widowed rancher with 3 traumatized kids and a failing ranch? Especially that. They stood there in Emmy's room, holding each other while the sun came up and the house woke around them. And for the first time in longer than Clara could remember, the future didn't look terrifying. It looked like possibility. 3 weeks later, Clara stood in the bedroom. Her and Rhett's bedroom now, not Elizabeth's, and stared at herself in the mirror. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that Sadie and the neighbor ladies had helped her make. Wildflowers from the meadow were braided into her hair. She looked like someone getting married. She looked happy. She looked nothing like the girl who'd been sold for $47 and a horse. "You ready?" Sadie asked, appearing in the doorway. She wore a new blue dress and had Emmy by the hand. Emmy was in yellow, clutching her button collection like a talisman. "I think so," Clara said. "You look pretty," Emmy said, "like a princess." "I don't know about princess, but thank you, sweetheart." Owen appeared behind his sisters, wearing his good shirt and looking uncomfortable, but pleased. His leg had healed well enough that he only limped slightly now. "Papa's nervous," he reported. "Keeps checking his pocket for the ring and then forgetting he already checked." Clara smiled. "Is he having second thoughts?" "No, he's just scared you will." Owen's expression went serious. "You're not, are you? Having second thoughts?" "No," Clara said honestly. "Are you? Having second thoughts about me marrying your father?" Owen considered this. "Little bit. But that's because change is scary, not because I don't want you here." He paused. "Mama would have liked you, and I think she'd be glad Papa found someone who makes him smile again. So, no. No second thoughts. Not really." Clara's eyes stung. "Thank you, Owen. Don't cry. You'll mess up your face and Sadie will have a fit." They made their way downstairs and out to the meadow, where half the county had gathered under an old oak tree. Rhett stood at the front with the traveling minister, and when he saw Clara, his face did that thing that made her stomach flip. Pure love. No hesitation. She walked toward him on Owen's arm. The boy had insisted on giving her away, and didn't take her eyes off Rhett's face. When she reached him, he took her hands and whispered, "You're beautiful. You're biased. Completely. Don't care." The ceremony was simple. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to choose each other every day, to protect the family they'd built, to weather whatever came next together. When the minister said Rhett could kiss his bride, he did so thoroughly enough that someone in the crowd whistled. Clara blushed, but she kissed him back anyway. They were married. The celebration afterward was loud and joyful. There was food and music and dancing. Emmy refused to let go of Clara's skirt. Sadie flirted with the neighbor boy. Owen actually smiled for the first time in Clara's memory, and Rhett pulled Clara aside at sunset, led her to a quiet spot under the trees, and kissed her like he'd been waiting his whole life to do it. "Happy?" he asked. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "But yeah, happy." "Me too." What? They stood there as the sun set over the mountains, husband and wife now, and Clara thought about the long, strange road that had brought her here. From sold to chosen. From worthless to loved. It shouldn't have worked. A man buying a girl in a blizzard, falling in love while grief still clung to everything, building a family out of broken pieces. But somehow it had. And as Rhett pulled her close and the sound of laughter drifted from the meadow, Clara let herself believe in impossible things, like second chances, like love after loss, like home. The first month of marriage was harder than Clara expected. Not because she didn't love Rhett. She did, fiercely and completely. Not because the kids rejected her new role. They'd accepted it faster than she had. But because becoming a wife meant something different than being hired help. And Clara didn't know how to navigate the difference. She kept waiting for Rhett to tell her what to do, like Elias used to. kept apologizing for things that didn't need apologies, kept expecting him to change his mind about wanting her. "You don't have to ask permission to use the good dishes," Rhett said one morning, exasperated but gentle. "This is your house now." "I know." "Do you? Because you're still acting like a guest." Clara set down the plate she'd been holding. "I spent 3 years being told I was a burden, and 18 years before that being reminded I didn't deserve anything good. You can't just marry me and expect all that to disappear." Rhett's face softened. He crossed the kitchen and pulled her into his arms. "You're right. I'm sorry. Take all the time you need. Just know that you belong here. You're not temporary anymore." Clara buried her face in his chest, breathing in the smell of him, leather and wood smoke, and something that was just Rhett. "I'm trying to believe that." "I know, and I'll keep reminding you until you do." It was small moments like that, Rhett's patience, the kids' easy acceptance, the way the ranch felt like home instead of a place she was borrowing, that slowly convinced Clara she was allowed to stay. But the past had a way of showing up when you least expected it. 4 months after the wedding, Elias Crow arrived at the ranch. Clara was in the garden with Emmy, planting vegetables for summer, when she heard the wagon. She looked up and felt her stomach drop straight through the earth. Elias looked older, thinner. His face had the gray pallor of someone who'd been sick, and he moved with a careful slowness that spoke of pain. But his eyes, those were the same, sharp and mean, and looking for weakness. "Clara!" he called out, climbing down from the wagon like every movement hurt. "Didn't think I'd find you still here." Clara stood, putting herself between Elias and Emmy. "What do you want? That any way to greet your uncle? Your only living family? You sold me. I don't owe you greetings." Elias had the nerve to look wounded. "I did what I had to do. You were a burden I couldn't afford." "Then why are you here?" Before Elias could answer, Rhett appeared from the barn, moving fast. He took in the scene, Claire's defensive posture, Emmy hiding behind her skirts, the stranger who could only be one person, and his expression went hard. "You must be Elias Crow," Rhett said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And you're the man who bought my niece." Elias tried for a smile. "Guess it worked out well for both of us." "Get off my property." "Now hold on. You sold an 18-year-old girl in the middle of a blizzard for $47. You don't get to show up here like you're owed hospitality." Rhett moved to Clara's side, a solid wall of protection. "So I'll say it again. Get off my property." Elias's face flushed. "I came to apologize, to make amends." "I don't want your apologies," Clara said, finding her voice. "I don't want anything from you." "Clara, please. I'm sick. Doctor says I got maybe a year left, probably less." Elias coughed, harsh and wet. "I wanted to make things right before I go." Clara felt something twist in her chest. Not sympathy, not exactly, but something close to it. Because for all the harm Elias had done, he was still the man who'd taken her in when her parents died, had kept her fed and clothed, even if he'd made her pay for it in other ways. "You can't make this right," she said quietly. "You can't undo selling me like cattle. You can't take back the years of being told I was worthless." I know I can't." Elias looked smaller suddenly, diminished by sickness and regret. "But I need you to know I'm sorry. That it wasn't about you. It was about me being bitter and angry and taking it out on someone who couldn't fight back." "That doesn't make it better." "No, it doesn't." He coughed again. "Your mother was my little sister. And when she died, all I could see when I looked at you was everything I'd lost. So I pushed you away because it hurt less than remembering." Clara had wondered for years why Elias hated her so much. Hearing the answer didn't make it hurt less. If anything, it hurt more, knowing she'd been punished for resembling someone he loved. "You should go," Rhett said, his hand finding Clara's. But Clara surprised herself. "Wait." Rhett looked at her. "Clara, I need to say something." She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and faced the man who'd made her childhood a misery. "You broke something in me when you sold me, made me believe I was worthless, that nobody would ever want me for anything except what I could do for them. And I carried that for a long time." Elias's face crumpled. "I'm sorry, I'm not finished." Clara's voice was steady now, stronger than she felt. "But I'm not broken anymore. I have a family who loves me, a husband who chose me,
Kids who call me mama. And I built that despite you, not because of you. So you can take your apology and your guilt and your year left to live, and you can go, because I don't need your forgiveness, and I'm not giving you mine." Elias looked like she'd struck him. "Clara, Actually, I changed my mind." Clara felt something loosen in her chest, something she'd been carrying without knowing it. "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I'm tired of letting what you did to me take up space in my head. So yeah, I forgive you. Now leave." Elias stood there for a long moment, tears running down his weathered face. Then he nodded, climbed back into his wagon, and drove away without another word. Clara watched until he disappeared over the hill. Then her legs gave out and she sat down hard in the dirt. Rhett was beside her immediately. "You okay?" "I don't know." Clara's hands were shaking. "I thought if I ever saw him again, I'd be angrier, but I feel tired." "You were brave." "I was terrified." "Brave and terrified aren't mutually exclusive." He pulled her close. "I'm proud of you." Emmy emerged from behind Clara's skirts and climbed into her lap. "Mama Clara, is the mean man coming back?" "No, baby, he's not coming back." "Good." "I didn't like him." Clara hugged Emmy tight, breathing in the little girl's sunshine smell, and felt the last piece of her past loosen and fall away. That night, after the kids were asleep, Clara and Rhett lay in bed together, and Clara finally let herself cry. Not for Elias. For the girl she'd been, scared and unwanted and convinced she didn't deserve good things. "I was so angry at him for so long," she said against Rhett's chest, "and now I just feel empty. Like I spent years hating him, and now that he's dying, there's nothing left." "Maybe that's what forgiveness feels like," Rhett said. "Not warm and fuzzy, just done." "Maybe." "You know what I think?" Rhett's hand traced patterns on her back. "I think you've spent your whole life being told you weren't enough, and you believed it because nobody showed you different. But you are enough, Clara. You always were. Elias was just too broken himself to see it." Clara absorbed that, turning it over in her mind. "When did you get so wise?" "Married a smart woman. Some of it rubbed off." She laughed despite the tears, and Rhett kissed her forehead. "I love you," he said. "Not because you're useful, not because you saved my family, but because you're you. Scars and fears and all the messy parts. I love all of it. Even when I'm crying all over you? Especially when you're crying all over me. Means you trust me enough to fall apart." Clara kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't say into it. And Rhett kissed her back like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Summer came in full force, turning the ranch green and gold and beautiful. Owen's leg healed completely, and he threw himself into ranch work with the enthusiasm of a boy trying to prove he was grown. Clara and Rhett let him, but they also made sure he still went to school, still had time to be 12. Sadie discovered she liked teaching, started gathering the younger kids from neighboring ranches and holding lessons in the barn, using books Elizabeth had collected. She was good at it, patient and firm, and Clara could see the woman she'd become, strong and kind and unafraid. Emmy bloomed, talked constantly now, making up for months of silence. She followed Clara everywhere, chattering about buttons and flowers, and the baby rabbits in the meadow. And every night, without fail, she'd climb into Clara's lap and say, "Tell me about Mama Elizabeth." Clara always did. Told Emmy stories about the woman who'd loved her first, who'd left notes and recipes and a legacy of kindness. She made sure Emmy knew Elizabeth wasn't forgotten, that loving Clara didn't mean betraying her mother's memory. "You have two mamas," Clara told her one night. "One who's watching from somewhere we can't see, and one who's right here. And both of us love you more than anything." "That's a lot of love," Emmy said seriously. "You deserve a lot of love." And watching Emmy fall asleep, secure in the knowledge that she was wanted, Clara felt something settle in her own chest. She was building something here. Not just a family, a life, a future. One morning in late July, Clara woke up nauseous. She barely made it outside before she was sick, and when Rhett found her sitting on the porch steps afterward, pale and shaking, his eyes went wide. "Are you?" "I think so." "Are you sure?" "No. Maybe. I don't know." Clara wiped her mouth. "I've been tired lately, and my courses are late, but I didn't want to say anything until I was certain." Rhett sat down beside her, very carefully, like sudden movements might break something.
How do you feel about it? If you are. Clara thought about that. She was 19 years old. She'd been married less than 6 months. A baby was the last thing she'd planned for. But she thought about Emmy's laughter and Sadie's determination and Owen's grudging affection. Thought about the family she'd stumbled into and learned to love. Terrified, she admitted, but happy. Is that allowed? Yeah, Rhett's voice was rough. Yeah, that's allowed. How do you feel about it? He was quiet for a long moment. Terrified, too. Last time Elizabeth was pregnant, I lost both of them. The baby and her, and I don't know if I can— His voice cracked. I can't lose you, Clara. I can't go through that again. Clara took his hand. You're not going to lose me. You can't know that. No. But I can choose to believe it, and so can you. She squeezed his fingers. I'm young and healthy, and I'm not having twins or complications. And we'll be careful. Get the doctor involved early, do everything right, okay? Rhett nodded, but she could see the fear in his eyes, the memory of Elizabeth dying despite everything he'd tried. Hey, Clara cupped his face. Look at me. I'm here. I'm staying. And we're going to have a baby, and it's going to be okay. You sound very certain for someone who is just throwing up. I have to be certain enough for both of us right now. You can fall apart later. He laughed, watery and broken. Then he kissed her, gentle and desperate. I love you. I love you too. They told the kids that night at dinner. Sadie screamed. Owen choked on his water. Emmy asked if they could name the baby Button, and when Clara said probably not, suggested Flower as a compromise. What if it's a boy? Owen asked, recovering. Then we'll figure out a boy name that's not Button or Flower, Rhett said, grinning. Can I help pick? Sadie asked. Please, I'm good at names. We'll all pick together, Clara said. It's a family decision. Family. The word still felt strange in her mouth, but it was getting easier every day. That night, Rhett pulled out a box Clara had never seen before. Inside were baby clothes, small things Elizabeth had made, lovingly stitched and stored away. I couldn't look at these after she died, Rhett said quietly. But I think she'd want them used. For your baby. Our baby. Clara touched the tiny gowns, the soft blankets. Are you sure? Yeah. Elizabeth would have liked you, would have wanted this. Me finding love again, the kids having siblings, life continuing. He smiled, sad but genuine. She left me notes, in her recipe book, in the kids' rooms. Little reminders to keep living, to not get stuck in grief. She was smart. She was. And she was right. Life doesn't stop just because we lose someone. It keeps going, and we can choose to go with it or get left behind. Clara thought about that, about Elizabeth choosing life even knowing death was coming, about Rhett choosing to love again despite the fear, about 3 broken kids learning to trust again, about a girl sold for $47 finding a family in the frozen Wyoming wilderness. We're going with it, Clara said firmly. All of us. Together. The pregnancy was easier than Clara expected and harder than Rhett could handle. Every time Clara felt sick or tired or complained about her back hurting, Rhett spiraled. She'd find him pacing at night, checking to make sure she was still breathing. He banned her from heavy lifting, from anything remotely dangerous, from basically existing without supervision. I'm pregnant, not dying, Clara told him in exasperation after he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. Elizabeth seemed fine too, until she wasn't. I'm not Elizabeth. I know, but I can't. He ran his hands through his hair. I can't lose you, Clara. I'll do anything to keep you safe. Clara softened. Then trust me. Trust that I know my own body. Trust that I'll tell you if something's wrong. You can't protect me from everything by treating me like glass. It took time, but Rhett slowly learned to step back, to trust instead of control. And Clara learned to ask for help when she needed it instead of powering through out of stubborn pride. The kids were better. Owen built a cradle in the barn, working on it secretly for weeks before presenting it proudly. Sadie collected baby things from neighbors, washing and mending them carefully. Emmy talked to Clara's growing belly constantly, telling the baby about buttons and flowers and all the important things it would need to know. And slowly, the fear gave way to excitement, to hope, to the belief that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. Clara went into labor on a warm September evening. It started slow, just aches she could ignore while making dinner. But by the time the sun set, the pains were stronger, closer together, and she had to grip the counter to breathe through them. Rhett took one look at her face and went white. It's time. Not yet. Still have a few hours, probably. We're getting the doctor now. Rhett, now, Clara. I'm not taking chances. Owen rode for the doctor while Sadie got towels and water and everything the midwife had told them they'd need. Emmy clung to Clara until Rhett gently pried her away, telling her she needed to be brave and stay with Sadie. The labor was long, painful. Clara understood now why women died doing this. It felt like being torn apart from the inside. But the doctor was there, experienced and calm, talking her through each contraction. And Rhett stayed beside her the whole time, holding her hand, letting her squeeze until his fingers went white, whispering that she was strong and brave and doing so well. I can't, Clara gasped at one point, exhausted and hurting. I can't do this anymore. Yes, you can. You're almost there. I'm too tired. Then I'll be strong enough for both of us. Just a little longer, love, just a little more. When the baby finally came, a red, squalling, perfect little girl, Clara collapsed back against the pillows, crying from relief and exhaustion and overwhelming love. Rhett cut the cord with shaking hands, watched the doctor clean their daughter and wrap her in one of Elizabeth's blankets. And when he placed the baby in Clara's arms, he broke down completely, sobbing into Clara's shoulder. She's here, he kept saying. She's here, and you're okay, and she's here. Clara held their daughter and cried too, because she'd done it, survived something she'd been terrified of, brought new life into the world instead of death. What should we name her? She asked softly. Rhett looked at the baby, at Clara, at the life they'd built together. Hope, he said. Her name is Hope. And it fit perfectly. The kids met their sister the next morning. Emmy was enchanted, declaring Hope to be the most beautiful baby ever and better than any button. Sadie held her carefully, tears streaming down her face, murmuring about teaching her to read and bake and everything important. Owen pretended not to care, but Clara saw him touch Hope's tiny hand with reverence, his expression soft. She's so small, he said. You were this small once? Rhett told him. Was I this loud? Louder? They all laughed, and Hope, disturbed by the noise, started crying. Clara soothed her, and Rhett watched with an expression Clara had never seen before. Complete peace. Like all the broken pieces had finally come together. That night, with Hope sleeping in the cradle Owen made and the house finally quiet, Rhett pulled Clara close. Thank you, he said. For what? For staying, for loving my kids, for giving me hope, both the baby and the feeling. He kissed her forehead. For making me believe in second chances. Clara thought about the long road that had brought her here, from sold to chosen, from worthless to cherished, from surviving to actually living. I used to think my life ended the day Elias sold me, she said quietly, that I'd just exist, doing what I was told, never mattering to anyone. But I was wrong. My life didn't end that day. It started. Because of me? Because of all of you, this whole messy, complicated, beautiful family. She looked at Hope, at the children sleeping down the hall, at Rhett holding her like she was precious. You gave me a home, and I didn't even know that's what I was missing until I found it. Rhett was quiet for a long moment. Then, Elizabeth used to say home isn't a place. It's people who love you. I didn't understand what she meant until you came. Do you think she'd be happy with how things turned out? Yeah, I think she'd be glad we found each other. Glad the kids have you. Glad I didn't spend the rest of my life grieving instead of living. He paused. And I think she'd love Hope. Clara hoped he was right. Hoped that somewhere Elizabeth Callahan was watching and approving. That loving Rhett and his children wasn't a betrayal, but a continuation of something Elizabeth started. Years later, when people asked Clara about her life, she never knew quite what to say. She could tell them about being sold for $47, about the blizzard and the broken family and the slow, careful building of trust, about falling in love with a grieving widower and 3 wounded children who taught her what family really meant. But the real story, the one that mattered, wasn't about any of that. It was about learning that your worth wasn't determined by how other people treated you, that love could grow in the most unlikely places,
That families weren't just born, they were built, carefully, painfully, beautifully. That home wasn't where you came from, it was where you were chosen. Owen grew up to run the ranch, strong and steady, and nothing like the angry boy he'd been. Sadie became a teacher, opening a school in town and fighting for every child to get an education. Emmy collected stories instead of buttons, writing down everything about the family so nobody would be forgotten. And Hope grew up surrounded by siblings who adored her, parents who chose each other every day, and stories about two mothers who loved her before she was even born. On warm evenings, the family would gather on the porch. Owen would complain about the cattle. Sadie would talk about her students. Emmy would read her latest story. Hope would demand to be told about the blizzard again, about how Mama Clara came to them. And Clara would tell it, every time she'd tell it. Not because it was a happy story. It wasn't, not at the beginning, but because it was a true one. A story about broken people finding each other, about love growing in frozen ground, about a girl who thought she was worthless, discovering she'd been precious all along. Rhett would take her hand while she talked, the way he always did, and Clara would squeeze back, grateful for every single day that brought her here. To this porch, this family, this life she'd never imagined but couldn't imagine living without. Tell the part about the $47 again, Hope would say, young enough that she thought it was romantic instead of tragic. And Clara would smile. Your father paid $47 and a horse for me. At the time, I thought that's all I was worth. Took me a while to figure out I was priceless. That's because Papa's smart, Hope would announce. The smartest, Rhett would agree, kissing Clara's temple. And Clara, who'd once been an unwanted orphan, a burden, a girl sold like cattle, would look at her family and know with absolute certainty that she'd found exactly where she belonged. Not because life was perfect. It wasn't. They fought and struggled and worried about money and weather and all the things frontier families worried about. But they faced it together. And that made all the difference. Because in the end, Clara learned the most important truth she'd ever know. You didn't need to be perfect to be loved. You didn't need to have everything figured out to build a life worth living. You just needed people willing to choose you day after day through the good and the bad and everything in between. And Clara Callahan, née Whitmore, sold for $47, married for love, had found that. Had found everything, had found home.